Chief Archibald, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Listen, I want to begin with, if you will, your own reflections. What are you thinking of as we approach the second National Day for Truth and Reconciliation?
I always have the survivors of those institutions of assimilation and genocide. I don't call them schools anymore. I have them always in my mind and in my heart. As I travel across Canada, I make an effort to stop at some of these former institutes and offer tobacco and pray for the thousands of little children who never made it home. And so as I think about this day, it's really for them, for the ones who suffered and survived, and certainly for the ones who didn't make it home as well.
Now, of course, the Catholic Church ran about 70% of these institutions, and one of the TRC's calls to action was to get the Pope to apologize for residential schools on Canadian soil. That happened this past year, but of course many people are aware that for many the apology fell short. You've talked about that in the past. Why was the apology from the Pontiff not enough?
He didn't apologize for the church specifically. I mean, it's really the role of the church, the institution, and that's what the TRC call to action is. It's for the role of the church in the genocide of against Indigenous peoples, First Nations people, Métis and Inuit. And it wasn't those specific words. He did make an apology, and many survivors were really grateful for that. They wanted to hear the words, "I'm sorry," and he said it several times, "I'm very sorry," or "I'm deeply sorry." I can't remember the words right now. Mm-hmm. But he did make, an apology, and it was meaningful to some of the survivors, and others just didn't think it was enough.
Mm-hmm. I do wonder, from your viewpoint, is that emblematic of where this country is when it comes to reconciliation, where moves are being made, but from the vantage point of some, perhaps you, it's still not enough?
Well, there have been some forward movement on TRC calls to action, but there have also been some real steps backward as well. The recent Supreme Court matter regarding our children in the province of Quebec is a big step backward. The language bill in Quebec as well is a big step backward. But we've had some forward movement. We have, the actual flag, the survivor's flag, now on Parliament Hill, and it has a home there. That's a step forward. And, there are just it's never like a big progress where we can say, oh, this year has been a monumental year. It's just always complex. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And maybe that's just the nature of reconciliation in this country. We've always said there has to be truth before reconciliation, and we certainly don't see enough of the truth-telling that has to happen across Turtle Island, across this country.
Mm-hmm. Well, to pick up on that, you did offer condolences to King Charles and the royal family after the passing of Queen Elizabeth, but you also said that while it's okay to grieve, it's also okay at the same time to hold institutions accountable, which I take as part of your reason for going to London to attend the funeral of the Queen.
Yeah, people, I think the problem that we're having right now, not only in Canada, but around the world, is the rise of populism. And populism really wants us to believe that the world is black and white, that we're either good or evil, that there isn't any, shades of gray, and that we can't hold 2 spaces at once. We can, offer condolences and be respectful of a mourning period, but also say to the Crown, you participated in genocide, you upheld genocide. Colonization has been particularly destructive to First Nation families and communities, and we have to be able to hold these 2 spaces and have these kinds of complex conversations around reconciliation And, and that's what I would say this year is about, is like, we really have to have these complicated conversations that aren't black and white, that people can begin to see the nuances of the existence of First Nations people and what we deal with on a daily basis and have been dealing with for hundreds of years.
What would you like then from the political leadership in this country to essentially keep in mind on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, thinking about where we are, the path we have taken to get here, and the path forward? What would you like politicians to keep in mind?
It's important for us to accelerate the TRC calls to action. Governments, whether it's federal, provincial, municipal, other partners that are mentioned in the TRC report, have to find a way to accelerate this work. At this stage, we did a report card on what's been happening with the TRC calls to action. And at the rate we're at, it will take 40 years to implement all of the TRC calls to action, and that's just not acceptable. And so governments and partners have to figure out the path forward with us. And we talked about this, when I was elected, we're always talking about the healing path forward and how we can rebuild First Nation communities and have healing not only for our survivors and our intergenerational trauma survivors, but for all Canadians, for people who have become very empathetic and supportive of First Nation issues. It's time for us to work together to fulfill all of those calls to action.
Mm-hmm. And before I let you go, you mentioned Canadians who are not in political leadership. What is your call for any non-Indigenous person in this country? What is your call on this second day, the second annual National Day of Truth and Reconciliation?
There is a small handbook on the TRC calls to action that they can likely get a copy of through either the Government of Canada or the Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. And I would urge all Canadians to read all of the 94 calls to action. And I would also urge Canadians to call their MPs, their MPPs, their MLAs, their mayors, their council members, and say, what are you doing about reconciliation in this country or in this town or in this province? And I want to see more. I want us to have truth and reconciliation and have that healing, not only for First Nations people, but for all families, because that's what these unmarked graves have done in this country. It's awakened people to the idea that every child matters, that they can really understand, the losses of children, because everybody loves their children, everybody loves their grandchildren. And that's what I think we have to really begin to focus on.
Chief Archibald, really appreciate our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for those who do find these conversations triggering, a reminder, there is help out there. You see on your screen right now the various organizations that you can call to get counseling.